and welcome to the Katie Halper Show. On today's episode, we talk to Allegra Love, an immigration attorney who runs Santa Fe Dreamers Project. Then we talk to Christine Henderson with Equal Justice USA about Aramis Ayala, who is the first ever African-American state's attorney in Florida's history. She announced that she would not seek the death penalty in any murder cases, including in the case of a police officer's killing. This sparked the very Republican Rick Scott to remove her from the case, which critics claim he lacks the authority to do. Hello and welcome to the Katie Halper Show. I'm your host, Katie Halper, and I'm joined by
Gabe Pacheco.
And we're really excited to announce that our next live taping will be April 12th at the Brooklyn Commons, which is 388 Atlantic Avenue. And our guest will be Matt Karp, historian of the U.S. Civil War era and its connections with the broader 19th century world. He received his PhD in history from the University of Pennsylvania and joined the Princeton faculty in 2013. His first book, This Vast Southern Empire, Slaveholders at the Helm of American Foreign Policy, published by Harvard, explores the relationship between American slavery and American power in the decades before the Civil War. He's also very swole.
Okay. Okay, so he's been lifting the weights.
Yeah.
He's too fast, too furious.
Oh my God. Honestly, we will get, if we just put up this image of Matt Karp, we will have a full house.
Hey, everybody, you got to come to the show. Come to the live show. I love it because it's the only time I get to see the fans. So
Gabe is very skeptical.
I'm always skeptical. I feel like I'm just throwing my voice out there into the void. But at the live shows, it's always packed. Make sure you show up early. We start the live taping at 7 p.m. They are electrifying.
So we are really excited to talk to you, Allegra Love. She began her career at Santa Fe for Public Schools in 2005 as a bilingual elementary school teacher and followed her passion for working with immigrants to law school. After graduating from the University of New Mexico School of Law, she came to work for the Adelante program of Santa Fe Public Schools, where she founded the Santa Fe Dreamers Project. She volunteers extensively both in her community and elsewhere for organizations like the Santa Fe Youth Commission, No More Deaths, and New Mexico Dreamers in Action. Most recently, she's worked to defend Central American women and children detained on the U.S. border. So, Allegra, what are some of the things that you feel like people need to know about that they're not hearing about?
I think a lot of people have deportation on the brain right now because, the Trump administration has made such a big deal about their deportation plans and how important it is that we deport people. And I think that it causes a bunch of drama in communities. But I think what it does is it sort of like misses the point of where all the exciting thing is happening involving immigrants in this country, which is, immigrants start businesses faster than U.S. citizens. So like in my city where I live, Santa Fe, New Mexico, we had something like 3 times as many business licenses taken out by immigrants than citizens a couple of years ago. I mean, you're talking about how that strengthens our economy and how I work with Dreamers and my Dreamer clients. A couple of years ago, we did a survey in Santa Fe Public Schools. We had about a 65, maybe 67% graduation rate in our schools. The Dreamers I worked with were graduating at a 96% rate from our high school. And so this is a really exciting thing. These are kids who, against all odds, are defying understanding of what it means to be at risk in our schools. And they're getting the job done and they're going into our community colleges. We have in New Mexico, 1 in every 10 tech jobs or something, or medical jobs. We don't have a high school graduate to fill. We don't have someone to fill those positions. So I'm excited that we're putting our immigrant kids through high school and into community college where they can start becoming bilingual workers who can fill those positions in our state. This is all the really exciting thing that's going on with immigrants in this country.
How do you, though, balance the kind of positive, good things that immigrants are doing without neglecting the hardships that they are going through?
Right. It's a really hard position to be in right now to be an immigrant. They're the target. They're super vulnerable. They're the target of a lot of hate, a lot of blame, and also these new enforcement priorities in the country, right, with ICE and the Trump administration. And so we have to take that really seriously. And so we're doing Know Your Rights trainings to survive law enforcement encounters. We're helping people make family plans. We're screening people as fast as possible so that we can get them into immigration programs that can protect them, stuff like that, like the Dreamer stuff. And the question of what reform looks like is really complicated. But I can tell you where it starts. And the real reform in this country is going to start when we stop needing to punish people for being migrants or for migrating or having moved. Like, listen, I'm not trying to say that I'm not trying to advocate that people break the law, right? It's a problem that all my clients are in the country without permission. But it's a problem that can be addressed in many different ways that don't require like dehumanizing things or tearing families apart or destroying a life that they've built here in this country. There's ways that we can address the illegality of what has happened that doesn't require completely devastating punishment.
Like a proportionate.
A proportionate response to what's happened. And also acknowledge maybe a proportionate response should also factor in all the contribution and the economic engine that Mexican immigration has been in the last 2 decades, you know? Like, when we're deciding how we're going to punish these people, can we also acknowledge how much they've done? And when you come from a town like me, the immigrants build the homes, they run our tourism industry, they create an immense amount of taxes and gross receipts for our city. Like, they are contributing. So maybe we can deduct a little bit about the insane moral judgment we want to have on them.
And you're talking about
some of the good things that they've brought to us. You're
talking about undocumented workers, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think Americans are mostly in agreement that as long as it was done legally, they don't care.
Right.
What's upsetting for me is most people, when they utter that sentence, don't understand what it means to do immigration legally. They have an idea of what legal immigration looks like, and they have no idea how complicated, expensive, sometimes impossible it is. And they're really quick to be like, oh, you've made a terrible decision by choosing to do this illegally, without understanding any of the factors that go into it and how difficult immigration can be.
Or understanding what the United States government did to make their immigration so necessary. Can you speak about that a bit? And because I know that you're working on the border and you work with Central American women and children. And that's a story that I think is really important to be told, how, you know, it's not like these people exist in a vacuum and they're like, oh, I feel like traveling today. I'm going to go check out the U.S.
So I work with women and children from the Northern Triangle of Central America. And so that's El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. And those countries are they're in utter collapse right now. El Salvador is the most violent place in the world that you could possibly live. It's got the highest murder rate in the world. And they're just randomly murdering young people in that country.
Why is it so violent in El Salvador right now?
There's two warring gangs right now that have taken over the country. The rule of law has collapsed, and two gangs, the Mara Salvatrucha and the Mara 18, are like battling for control.
And are those gangs from El Salvador originally?
Leading question.
They're from the U.S.
Right.
So this is a major point that Katie just brought up. These gangs were originally basically started in L.A. and I think on the East Coast of D.C. Essentially to protect Central Americans, to protect themselves from other gangs. So there was a huge exodus from Salvador and Guatemala in the 80s, and all these young Central American immigrants found themselves in these cities and then found themselves in the prisons of these cities. And these gangs basically formed in the streets and prisons of LA as a form of protection against different,
Aryan Brotherhood.
Like Mexican gangs and stuff like that, which I'm not trying to condone what happened, but violence is horrible no matter what the context is. But then what happened is Bill Clinton evacuated our jails of all these gangsters back into Guatemala and Salvador after these countries had been ripped apart. No social fabric, no social structure. Right after the Civil War, sent all these people back basically into like an incubator for these gangs to become really powerful. And so these gangs that in the 90s were just street-level gangs, now, 20 years later, have become basically like the de facto government of these countries.
So they learned, they got the franchise formula, they got the secret sauce formula down pat here in LA and in DC, and then it got exported back to the villages of El Salvador.
That's the story that I've been told.
Wow, they learned it from watching us, right? Kind of.
Not to mention the hand we had in the the civil wars down there in the
Right.
80s too.
Right.
Like it's like a
Contras.
whole cyclical thing.
Right. We've had
assassination of Archbishop
Romero. Right. The Cold War. We actually
Right.
had Greg Grandin on. We got to have him back, but he really lays it out. All the things that we did to contribute to this massive instability.
And now I kind of forget what the original question was, but what we're doing is now these folks women and children especially, are fleeing this region to come back into the United States because they cannot possibly live there. And the conditions of violence are so strong, people are like preemptively leaving before like one of their kids gets murdered or something like that. We've built up this concept of the immigrant as being like the Mexican who's trying to get through a wall, that we're missing that Mexican migration right now is at a net negative. Like we are not seeing we're seeing a negative change in Mexican migration right now. People crossing the border right now are Central Americans who are fleeing violence and fleeing just completely unstable living conditions. What does this mean in terms of like our immigration policy? I know someone from El Salvador, like a family from El Salvador, who the parents are United States citizens, but they have an adult daughter who is living in El Salvador. They, by law, are allowed to put in paperwork for her to become a U.S. citizen, right? Like, she's the daughter of a U.S. citizen. They can put the petition in. The problem is right now is that you put a petition in like that, and I'm just sort of like looking up the travel bulletins right now, but it's something like from El Salvador for an adult kid of a U.S. citizen, the wait right now is like 13 years. And that's because we have all, like, our immigration system so backed up that the waiting list for visas that you're legally entitled to are so long. So you're saying to someone like a young woman in a country where femicide has the highest rate in the world, who needs to flee right now, and the lawyer's saying, yeah, we can get her here legally in 13 years.
Yeah.
So people are like really quick to say like, she had a choice to come legally or illegally. And I'm like, did she?
Right, not really.
Like, what would you do in that situation? Are we really calling that a choice? Or can we say, like, let's give you a light punishment for what you did and not give you your punishment for that choice being sending you back into the murderous place you went?
Right, and they've also already gone through something traumatic, right? Again, it's not like a walk in the park. I mean, it's like by very nature of what they've done, they've gone through something. But, I think
people hate moving.
Yeah, exactly. They got to.
Yeah, I think that's another thing that like people don't understand about migrants or refugees. Like, it's like, who wants to leave their home?
Exactly.
Oh,
right.
I'm so like, yeah, some people do, but like most people don't. They love the smells, the sounds, the comfort, the memories, the feelings. They love their homes. There's like a great poem you should read. It's by like Warson Shire called Home, which describes like no one leaves, like how no one leaves their home unless they have to. People want to be in their homes, especially Central American women and children. They don't want to be here. They want to be in their homes, but their home's no longer their home. It's no longer a safe place to be. It no longer looks like the place that they loved and the place that was their home. But we also don't want to lose sight of the fact that the story of immigration throughout our history has been about innovation, about cultures mixing, about creating our country and building our country. Our Nobel Prize last year, like the American Nobel Prize winners, every single person besides Bob Dylan was foreign born. Every American who was awarded the Nobel Prize. That's the story of immigrants in our country right now. And so, like, yes, we're asking people to stand in front of our immigrants, right? Stand between them and law enforcement, but we're also asking them to get behind them too. And say, if this person's worth defending, if you're saying that this person's worth defending from deportation, they're also worth creating scholarships so they can get through school. Putting them into the kind of programs that can get them into our workforce and working, helping them buy homes, helping them start businesses. That's just as important.
I think it's very important to acknowledge that there are a lot of successful immigrants, undocumented workers, people who achieve the American dream. But I also think it's like our respect of undocumented people can't be contingent on their being successful entrepreneurs.
No.
So how do we kind of both emphasize that, but also kind of just have a basic level of humanity where if you're not that, it's okay still?
Yeah, and that's like a huge problem, right? And I'm not sure how to approach that except incrementally, which is to say, like, look, this is how it's working with the dreamers, right? Because one of my whole problem with the dreamers is I think dreamers are amazing. I think they're incredible. But I also know that, like, a kid who entered the country in 2009 doesn't technically qualify as a dreamer. Yet we say dreamers are heroes, they're wonderful. You are still this like undocumented criminal, right? We can't do that. We can't have these strict interpretations of what qualifies you as being worth it and who doesn't. But one of the interesting things about dreamers is I think a lot of Americans have acculturated to the idea of it.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're able to look a ring out and say, like, well, maybe this kind of person's not so bad too. So I think that it's hard to ask people to do everything all at the same time, but I think that we can incrementally start seeing people as who they are, sort of like ring by ring. So I agree, like I don't want someone to have to be a successful business person or a college graduate to feel like they are worth being in this country. But I think that we can use those people as an example and then say like, now let's look at their brother. Let's look at their partner. And say like and to sort of acculturate ourselves to this idea that we have nothing to fear about immigrants in our community. In fact, we have everything to gain from the moment we decide to embrace them and use them as resources and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's actually very smart because obviously like Gabe and I and our listeners are super like anti-neoliberal. You know, we were like cheering when you brought up Bill Clinton and all the terrible things that he did.
It was like,
whatever that sound is.
Like,
But I also think it's important to be realist, right? And when I say realist, I don't mean like what the neoliberals say when they say realist, which is like dismantling the welfare state. But what you just hit on is like a very good strategy where you you start by breaking down or debunking these myths. And people have these myths of the American dream and the capitalist story, success story, and social mobility, right? And if you kind of show, well, actually not all undocumented people or people who came here, I don't even like to say illegally, but without the
proper paperwork.
Yeah, exactly. That they are not all, in fact, not most of them are not this at all. Like whatever, parasites or criminals. Yeah. And if you show like the successful restaurant owner, then I think you're right that's one step closer. It makes it that much easier to just be like, look, this is a human being. Maybe they're unemployed just right now, just like lots of white native born or native born of whatever background are unemployed too.
Yeah. I mean, one picture I really like to paint for people when they start talking about the success issue is like, what does success look like for a parent? And that's sometimes like, no, maybe a parent's success is not going to be they started a business, they graduated college, or they invented an app, whatever. But maybe success for a new immigrant parent means that they haven't changed homes in 5 years. Or a single mother is able to leave someone who's abusing her because she's economically stable enough. And like respect it. I live in a state where we can't hardly take care of our children. We're so bad at it. So seeing an immigrant success as being able to raise a healthy, well-adjusted child is a huge success in this state. And so I like to like paint success as that too. As someone who like maybe for the first 5 years they're working, they might have to have their kids on Medicaid. Maybe their kids are off Medicaid by the time they're like 15, you know. Like finding ways to define success by like where someone starts and where they're getting to and the kind of kids that they're raising as well. Because there's not a whole lot that you can do to disrupt federal law enforcement. The only thing we can do is continue to support the growth and the progress of these folks in our community and continue to believe in the possibility of them being a part of our community and making our towns and cities, our country stronger, because that's how we're going to get to the point where we're ready for the real reform that we need.
Okay, that's interesting because I feel like everyone is saying like we can stop these deportations, not one more. We got to shut down what Trump is doing over my dead body or whatever. And you're kind of saying the opposite.
Look, I'm an immigration lawyer. I love my community. I'm going to do everything I possibly can that's in my toolbox to stop people from being deported. The fact of the matter is, we might come to a point where those tools don't exist, and we're gonna if Trump wants to deport all these folks and he wants to commit the money and the infrastructure to it. I'm not convinced that he has the money or the infrastructure or the actual will of the nation to do what it's going to take. But let's say he does. There's not a whole lot like a lawyer like me is going to be able to do to stand in the way of that. So what can I do? Is that I can continue to try and to make immigrants as essential to my economy and essential to my town and essential to my community as possible. So that, that's what I mean. Like the true form of sanctuary is going to be having people be completely integral to our community and our economy. Like, we might not be able to stop deportations, but that's going to push the American consciousness about immigration to the place where we're ready for reform.
I just keep thinking, well, how about universal programs, right? Like Medicare for all or free college tuition, right? Like there's so much stigmatizing that happens because these things are means tested. I just wonder how much that should also be pursued, not at kind of the expense. I mean, I think there's this false narrative that that liberals have where it's like, oh, why are you appealing to and catering to white workers and throwing people of color or undocumented people under the bus? I mean, yeah, of course, certain populations need targeted advocacy or organizing, but things like universal health care or free college tuition are things that help everyone.
Everybody. Well, and that's what, when we try and talk about how we message this and it's because I want white workers to understand that they have everything to gain from integrating immigrants into our society. They're going to see job improvements. They're going to see their economy. They're going to see more jobs. This is how it works. If it's done thoughtfully, their liberation is tied to the liberation of immigrants as well.
Oh my God. We are so clapping for you right now, even though you can't hear it. Yeah, sorry.
Right, but and that's why they need to take this need to punish and be angry away, and so that they can participate in crafting the kind of policy that's going to let them take full advantage of the resource that is sitting right at our feet and at our gates.
So you do not agree with the hot take that every time Bernie Sanders talks to a white coal miner that 17,000 people of color and LGBTQ people lose their wings?
I went to an Ivy League school. I live in this liberal pocket of northern New Mexico. I'm from central Wyoming, and there's it's really conservative there. And I know these folks, and they're not bad people. They have big hearts. And I think that the moment we say that people can't change, that they can't love, that they don't have compassion, we're going to lose it all. We're going to find ourselves back in the same position we found ourselves this year, where with deep, angry divisions between people, right? And so I believe a white coal miner is capable of learning, loving, and changing. But we also have to be capable of the same thing as well, and admit there's things we need to change about ourselves.
Right. It's like liberals have empathy for, as they should, undocumented workers, right? And they chastise conservatives for not being empathetic towards these people. But then they have this kind of punishing attitude that you were describing, that some people have, or is kind of articulated in the policies of the United States. They have that towards the working class, and they don't even they just use white working class as shorthand, as if all of the members of the working class are white, first of all. But yeah, there's this total punitive, I think myopic view that's very vindictive and vengeful. And it's I just don't understand what organizer actually thinks it's a bad idea to engage people who are potential allies, who are being screwed over by the same people as a lot of the undocumented workers, and to highlight that they have, not to sound corny, but to highlight the common interests. I just don't understand it. And I think half the time people just don't get it, and half the time they do get it, and they're just opposed to these more progressive programs, and they just want to stop them from happening. So they pretend it's about
but you're talking about literally the riskiest kind of organizing that there is.
What do you mean?
Which isn't that I find organizing. I'm not a professional organizer. I find professional organizers impressive. I can't imagine how to do their jobs. And so I don't want to go too far down the line of criticizing anyone. This is a deeply confusing time, and I think anyone
will do the criticizing.
I'm proud of anyone who's trying. You guys can do the criticizing. Yeah. The point is,
but I'm also criticizing not organizers. I'm criticizing the hot take people, the hot takes people.
Trying to include and organize with a group that you feel in opposition to is the absolutely riskiest way to organize, is because you might, it's hard work, right? And you might not make any progress, and you might have people legitimately challenge what you're doing, and it's really, really, it's really, really hard. And so I think that's why we don't see as much of that. It's because it's truly hard and it's advanced organizing. That's like what masters do, like Martin Luther King and stuff like that. Is that's like master organizing. And a lot of us who are now either amateurs like me or people who are just like either appointing themselves as organizers or just like earnestly or authentically joining in, we don't have the skills yet to get to that point.
Right. I mean, I guess I'm more referring to the kind of narrative, like we see Frank Rich wrote a piece, and this is kind of stupid because who cares? We're talking about, like, you're a lawyer and we're talking about organizing and legal strategies, but there is this liberal kind of tendency to say, I don't want to talk to these people. And I'm not saying that like undocumented people need to go talk to coal miners at all, but it's more the idea that these people need to be engaged and there needs to be outreach because, like it or not, like, and there's nothing incompatible between doing that and also organizing around the rights of undocumented people.
No. I think that the white sort of like working class that you're describing has to pay specific attention to this issue because they are being lied to.
Right, of
and
course.
I don't know someone from like my community say is directly reaching out to explain this to them as like intelligent, sane, smart people who make rational decisions every day based on their experience in the world, right? Like these folks are rational. I think they're being like really, really lied to that this issue matters to their well-being, and it doesn't. It's low-hanging fruit, and they're being told if we just deport all these immigrants, you're going to start seeing like more jobs, and this is not true. I mean, find an economist who can explain that to me. But I'd like to see caring organizers from my side of the thing explaining that, because once Trump loses that working class, he loses. I mean,
right. Well,
they have all the power in terms of what policies are going to be going forward with this stuff.
Right, which is why, I mean, I guess the elephant in the room or the independent animal in the room is the Bernie Sanders thing, right? I mean, I think that kind of reaching out and that articulation of politics is so necessary right now. If Sanders at all don't talk to these people, there is a vacuum, and who fills that vacuum but Donald Trump? People need to be explaining to these people that they are being lied to, that their quality of life will not be better if people are deported. But when you said your community, you said people from my community. How do you define your community? What is your community?
Well, I mean, I live in Santa Fe. I'm New Mexican. But I'm talking about, so yes, people in my town, because we're this like sort of tiny city up here in northern New Mexico that gets this issue, right? We get it really hard. And so we protect our immigrants in this city and we support them to thrive. We also in my community, like people who fight deportations, immigration lawyers, United We Dream, people who are advocates for reform, people who are advocates for the defense of immigrants, like this community. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not like really connected with like the Democratic Party or anything.
Right. Neither are we. We just like Sanders, basically.
New Mexico it feels sometimes really separated from the nation's politics, and we focus a lot on what's going on around us in our own community.
Local.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is Love your last name, or is that a messaging idea?
No, that's my last name.
Yeah. Just checking.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good one. They actually apparently they take legal cases. They'll take that into account, like that Loving case. The anti-miscegenation lawsuit that struck down that being illegal. The part of the reason they went with that particular couple is because their last name. Random thing.
Maybe I'll one day be like a famous Supreme Court plaintiff because of my last name.
Exactly. Love versus
That'd
the United
cool.
States. Yeah.
Santa Fe is also 500 years old, right?
417 years old or something.
Oh, 400.
Or 407. Like we just had our quadricentennial, like 5 to 10 years ago. I can't remember.
And were you there for that?
For the founding?
Yeah. I'm 435 years old.
Oh no, I meant for the celebration. But yes, you're a vampire. I love it.
I think so. Santa Fe really throws down hard every year for its celebrating itself. We have like huge fiestas celebrating the history and culture and the conquest of New Mexico. It's frightening and awesome and weird and unlike anywhere else in the United States. So I was definitely here. We burn a giant puppet in the park that's like, I don't know.
Zozobra.
4 stories high. Zozobra, yeah.
Wow. Gabe, you're like a New Mexican New Mexpert.
I know. He is a New Mexpert.
Yeah, right.
Just I remember passing through Santa Fe and was astounded that I felt like the American history books, the United States history books, weren't telling me the whole story.
No.
When I got to a city in North America within our borders that's so much older than everything else that we learned about the 13 colonies and all that.
Yeah.
So.
And anything else that you want to talk about? You feel like people don't know? Any myths that you want to shatter? To hear the rest of our interview with Allegra, including tips on what precisely you can do to protect yourself if you're undocumented, and also be in solidarity with undocumented workers, also what's going on with civil disobedience, and other insights into the movement, please go to patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show, and we'll be posting the rest of the interview as bonus content, and it's really good. Now we're happy to talk to Christine Henderson, who is a national organizer with Equal Justice USA, a national organization working to transform the justice system from one that harms to one that heals. We talked to Christine about Aramis Ayala, who is the first ever African-American state's attorney in Florida's history. She announced that she would not seek the death penalty in any murder cases, including in a case of a police officer's killing. This sparked the very Republican Rick Scott to remove her from the case, which critics claim he lacks the authority to do.
Hello, this is Christine.
Hi, Christine. It's Katie Halper.
Hi, Katie. How are you?
Good, thanks. Thank you so much for talking to me. Can you just tell listeners what is going on with this case with the state's prosecutor being removed?
Last week, Wednesday, State Attorney Ayala, made an announcement that she would not seek death on any cases as long as she is the state attorney, which was really a huge kind of movement and for kind of real criminal justice reform. And, she was very clear, right, with the decision that it's about policy, right, of the death penalty and how the research demonstrates that it doesn't really provide public safety, which is what people usually kind of use as the mask to. This is the main reason why, we support the death penalty, and it's for the victims and the victims' families. It's what the victims want. But when you really start to look at the problems with the death penalty, you start to really realize that it's actually very expensive, it's error-prone, and it's really unjustly applied. So when she made this announcement, obviously it caused an uproar in which Governor Scott himself kind of stepped in and took the case from her and assigned it to another state attorney, a prosecutor. And so this is really something that has never been done. So it's really caused a lot of not just local and state, but even national attention.
Can you talk to us about the legal authority or the lack thereof that Governor Rick Scott has in removing State's Attorney Ayala?
I mean, I think it's a huge overreach. And, I know there was a statement and letter put out that had signatures of over 100 legal leaders, that included Supreme Court judges, retired Supreme Court judges, lead prosecutors, saying that Governor Scott has overreached.
119 judges, prosecutors, and law professors signed letter questioning Scott's removal of Ayala from death penalty case. More than 100 legal experts issued a letter today expressing concern with Governor Rick Scott's removal of State's Attorney Aramis Ayala from the Markeith Lloyd case. Ayala said she would not pursue the death penalty, a stance with which the governor disagreed. The 119 signatories include 2 former Florida Supreme Court justices, 4 retired state Supreme Court justices, more than 24 current or former state and federal prosecutors, and approximately 90 law professors. The judges, lawyers, and professors' opinion is that Scott's move infringes on the independence of prosecutors, exceeds his authority, undermines the right of Orange Australia voters, and sets a dangerous precedent. Quote, your executive orders that seek to remove State Attorney Ayala from this position in the Lloyd case, absent any showing that her decision is violative of the state or federal constitution, compromises the prosecutorial independence a criminal justice system demands, the letter states. Quote, your removal of State Attorney Ayala compromises Floridians' right to the service of their elected leaders. Floridians in the Ninth Judicial Circuit elected State Attorney Ayala because she represents their local values and concerns. End quote. The letter concludes, this action sets a dangerous precedent. The governor picking and choosing how criminal cases are prosecuted, charged, or handled in local matters is troubling as a matter of policy and practice. Indeed, there appears to be no precedent in Florida for this type of use of power.
You know, as a prosecutor, and this is one of the things I work heavily on within the communities, is prosecutors have the discretion to not choose death on any case. It's up to them. They can literally say, we think that life without parole is just enough, a punishment outside of taking someone's life. She will not seek death, but she will continue to uphold the law was within her discretion. It's just really kind of interesting to see that, Governor Scott kind of flew in immediately on this and decided to take her off.
Right, because this case involves the execution of a police officer, and what we see historically, I mean, basically people have this attitude where, and I don't think this case is not necessarily about the guilt or innocence, but people do have this attitude where even when there isn't the guilt there, when there is innocence, someone has to pay for it, right? People do not like the politics of looking weak on or soft on law and order, as they say, right? Even though it's very easy to make the case, which you did, that like you're actually harder or you're better on law and order when you're reallocating the resources better, right? You're not making anyone safer when you're going to execute someone as opposed to put them in jail for life, and you're taking away resources from investigating and solving crimes, as you said. But I just think it's so rich and so ironic, and it would be funny if it weren't terrible, that the same week that this decision was made and that Rick Scott pounced and removed the attorney from this case, you have State's Attorney Katherine Fernandez Rundle deciding she will not be prosecuting prison guards who literally boiled a black schizophrenic prisoner to death in a shower that they controlled the temperatures of. His skin fell off because he was burned alive. And I mean, the corruption and dishonesty is incredible. And the people who work at this prison they're sadists. Like, they would do this thing called air trays, where they would like give prisoners trays with no food on it. They had one prisoner attack another prisoner. They bribed a prisoner to do that. And I just think it's really interesting that she totally condones, killing a prisoner. Not a single one of them is going to be charged with anything. And I know that's not your issue, and this isn't the death penalty case, but that is such a stark contrast. Pretty perfect, because that is what justice in Florida looks like. You decide not to seek the death penalty, even though that's within your legal right to decide, and you are removed by the governor. You decide not to prosecute prison guards for boiling a man to death. That's A-OK. Governor Rick Scott has no problem with that. These are really awful people. Ayala is the first African-American state's attorney in Florida's history.
Yes.
And another government employee. The assistant finance director of the Seminole County Clerk's office, Stan McCullers, wrote on Facebook, quote, maybe she should get the death penalty. She should be tarred and feathered, if not hung from a tree. End quote. And at Democracy Now!, Amy Goodman points out, the Orlando Sentinel reports that from 1877 to 1950, more than 300